Dave, can you promote me? Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Vincent Salimi. I'm the mayor of the city of Pinole, and I call to order the joint Pinole City Council and Planning Commission special meeting. Can you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance in honor of the U.S. military troops? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. That concludes item number 1. Let's move on to item number 2, which is the land acknowledgement. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Ohlone people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respect to the Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place Ohlone land, the land that Pinole sits upon their home. We are proud to continue the tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ohlone community for the stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Madam City Clerk, good evening. Item number 3, which is the roll call, City Clerk's report and statement of conflict, and then I will hand it to the Planning Commission for putting the meeting to order. Good evening, ma'am. Can you please do a roll call for the City Council?
Good evening, Mayor Salini.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Murphy. Now note for the record that Councilmember Tabe is absent. Councilmember Tom. Here. Councilmember Martinez Rubin. Hello. Hello, thank you. Acting City Manager Police Chief Gang.
Here.
Assistant City Attorney Mogg.
Here.
Mayor, the agenda was posted on Thursday, July 7th at 4 p.m. with all legally required notices. No written comments were received in advance of the meeting. Does the council have any conflicts to report on the agenda item tonight? And none, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Moriarty. Can you please go ahead?
Yeah, we'd like to call the Planning Commission meeting for today to order, and could we please have roll call.
Yeah, here we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Menes.
Here.
Commissioner Benzuli,
Here.
Commissioner Banuelos. Commissioner Current. Here. Vice Chair Martinez,
Here.
Chair Moriarty.
Present.
Excellent. That concludes item number 3. Thank you, Peter. And then I will move on to item number 4, which is citizen to be heard. Madam City Clerk, do you have any card tonight?
There are no in-person public comments. We do have a couple on Zoom.
Perfect. Can we move forward with the people on Zoom? Can we please have their names stated? And please, just talk about items that are not agendized. And if you are starting to talk about an item that is on the agenda, I will respectfully ask you to stop talking. Thank you.
We will start with Christy Lamb Julian. Let's go ahead.
I would just like to know, when I went to the workshop, to make sure that it was noted, to provide a safe place for women with children in a domestic violence situation or the LGBT community, in the plan. I guess. Sorry, my 6-year-old was touching things. Yes, just there would be needed to create a safe place or protocol moving forward for these community members that as of right now don't have very many resources elsewhere. I just wanted to make note that there are communities that are very concerned about having
Caller with the last 4 numbers, 5748. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you please state your name?
So my name's Anthony, and I'm a longtime 45-year-old plus citizen of Pinole, and I have a talk about tonight. One is I think the city council and the planning commission should take 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning or at the end of the meeting to and the need within our city and community of the Omicron COVID virus that is growing by leaps and bounds. Studies came out today that we have the highest surge since February, the early part of this year, with over 53% of the cases now are attributed to the new Omicron 5 variant. And why does it take somebody like, I won't mention his name, but he's in the audience tonight, to have to stand up on his own and give a brief 2-minute, 3-minute synopsis when it should be on part of the people that represent us in the city. You know, we can't rely just on the county health department or the president or somebody else. So I'm asking the mayor, city council, and the public works commission to take an active part in that. Also, can you give us an update on the situation with the at large that Mayor Vincent Salini said that he was going to be apprehended in short order. They have a description of him, they have a name of him, they have a picture of him, but nothing has been said or done. And it's been over 3 months as far as the public's concerned. They don't know anything or have any update on this person still at large. And we don't need to give the public the wrong idea that Pinole is an open invitation for people to come up and shoot up our city or parking lot. And just because no one was killed, two or three people were injured in the hospital and several cars were shot up that night 3 months ago. And also, I would like to mention that I made one mention, and it's been going on close to 3 months now with the anniversary of the Uvalde school shooting at Robb Elementary School. And it's easy to close the meeting with Amber Schwartz and anything to that effect, but no memory was made, no thought or prayers were made, a statement by the city council at the beginning or ending of the council's meeting and or the commissioner, and I think you should take time out tonight.
Thank you, sir. This is under investigation, and at this moment, I know the work is being completed, and this crime is under investigation, and we take it very seriously. The city of Pinole is a safe community, and has been a safe community, and will remain a safe community. And what had happened is unfortunately not a reflection of what the city of Pinole is, but it's a reflection of the society we live in. Thank you. Madam City Clerk, any other comments, please?
No, there are no more comments under citizens to be heard.
Excellent. If we don't have any other comments, then I will move on, close item number 4 and move on to item number 5, which is the workshop item. Workshop item tonight will be to receive progress update on land use planning for Pinole project, update to housing and health and safety elements and new environmental justice element and general plan, and provide direction as appropriate. And the action tonight will be to receive a report and provide direction to staff. Ms. Warren, good evening. And prior to the meeting, I just met with the consultant and I was talking with them. So I told them that we'll be starting at 6:10, and I'm glad that it's exactly 6:10. And they said they needed about 45 minutes for the presentation. They will just go all 52 slides, and they will be done by 7 p.m. And at 7 p.m., then I will turn it back to the City Council and Planning Commission. And I would please ask everybody to limit the question to less than two maximum. And then the consultant agreed that they will be able to provide the best answer on the 30 seconds to 1 minute. And then once we are done, I will then turn it back to the public. Thank you. Ms. Warren, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor Salini, council members, Chair Moriarty, and commissioners. In addition to members of the public and city staff, I'm Lily Wayland, Community Development Director for the City of Pinole. And tonight's special meeting focus is regarding the work which is currently underway to update our general plan. Pinole City staff, specifically myself, Planning Manager Dave Hannon, and Senior Planner Dustin Shu, are working closely with a strong technical team of 11 housing safety and environmental experts from consulting firm Michael Baker International to prepare an updated housing plan for the city, in addition to updating our plans for health and safety and creating a new plan for environmental justice in Pinole. The experts are here this evening and will be sharing with you some of the progress we've made over the last few months. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to, I think, Elliott or Serby, maybe Serby, who will be introducing the MBM team.
My name is Susie and I'm the project manager, and also I'm leading the safety element. Here with me are the housing element, Emily Elliott, who is leading the community outreach effort, Noel, who is leading the environment element strategic advisor. With that, I will turn it over to Emily as an update on community engagement.
And I'll just interrupt really quickly here to ask FCTV slides for us. Thank you.
Okay, so with just about 50 minutes to go through this, I'll be really always come back to questions at the end. With city staff, we put together a project-specific website, landuseplanning4pinole.com, and past and upcoming events for community outreach are published. So held stakeholder focus groups where we specifically talked about housing issues, but it did kind of cover safety and environmental justice too. And then finally, we had 2 community workshops, one in May and one in recorded. If anyone missed it and would like to see it, they're on the around town to help get the word out about the website. And then once a user goes to the website, we also put together postcards, and these got mailed to all postal customer addresses in Pinole. There have been posts on the city's social media feeds on Facebook and Instagram, and notifications. Anyone who's contacted us through the contact us at landuseplanning4pinole.com has been added to a contact list, and any updates are which was more of a housing safety, environmental justice element 101 type discussion. Later in the year, early fall, we'll have a public review of the draft elements. I comment back to us into the city. It is available in multiple languages to take it and an alternative language. I mentioned earlier, we held 2 community workshops. The first workshop, we had about 7 members of the public. And then in the second workshop, which had 18 people, which may not sound like a so we were following up with stakeholders who did not attend and offering one-on-one 15-minute interviews with them, or that they can provide written responses. These little comment bubbles are some of the comments that we got. I wanted to say that stakeholder focus groups were a little bit different than the community. Focus groups were steered more toward people affiliated with organizations that do work. Getting feedback from a different angle. Slide, please. So the next few slides are just going to cover some of our early survey data to date. First slide is indicating respondent level of concern regarding some level of concern. So this would be somewhat slides kind of organized left to right. So Again, you can still see that, for instance, on climate change, still 70% of respondents had some level of concern. So this question was level of concern about groups of people being able to obtain and the lower income workforce. And there seems to be less concern about individuals. The slide ranks concern for housing issues in Pinole, and the top 3 issues were overcrowding, homelessness, and neighborhood infrastructure. On the other end of the slide, segregation, discrimination, insufficient housing supply, and difficulty paying. So a high level of concern with all of. I think this chart's organized a little differently. It's showing levels of support, where the green bars indicate support, the blue bar is neutral, and the orange bar is opposite. This is in regard to programs and or activities that we could take to housing situation in Pinole. On the left side, low-income housing is pretty much in a dead tie. Supporting more low-income housing, and then the other half in opposition. Where there seems to be a lot of consensus is in workforce housing. So market rate housing with either a high neutral score or a low opposition. And this ranks opposition or support of different housing programs. On the left, triplexes or quadplexes that saw actually a high number. The programs to the right, making housing continues to stay affordable. This can be interpreted as into the feedback we got on community. We're wanting to see good infrastructure with access to amenities. The question has to do more with the health and safety. To rank what type of natural hazard people in the community. One concern of respondents, but wildfires and thank you.
Element and health element. Of these, safety and noise elements are mandatory. The health element is an optional element for California government code. It is required by law to update the safety element. Safety element addresses the impacts of major natural and human-made hazards. Hazards could include seismic events like ground shaking, tsunami, dam failure. It also includes flooding, low instability, fire, climate change, and drought. Human-made events can refer to storage and transportation of hazardous materials, crime. Noise element, on the other hand, addresses the impacts of noise and discusses the anticipated future noise level. and health element addresses the health and well-being of residents that is fundamental to the quality of life. While taking a look at the health and safety element, we thought that it would be beneficial to reorganize the document a little bit. So what we are proposing is to reorganize the current health and safety element, since health element closely overlaps with common topics of discussions such as air and water quality, GHG emissions, and access to free parks, transit, and community facilities. So we are trying to move the health element discussion, goals and policies to the environmental justice element in order to avoid duplication of goals and policies. However, the noise element can continue to be the part of the safety element or can become a standalone element. Of updating information on the current safety element with new information mapping that is available and in accordance with the OPR guidelines, that is Office of Planning and Research guidelines. We have also added several new topics of discussion, including climate resiliency, evacuation routes, drought, dam inundation, impact of tsunami, and emergency preparedness. The new laws have come into effect since the last adoption of the current safety element. For SB 99, we are in the process of identifying evacuation routes with the help of the city staff, and we will map the neighborhoods that do not have access to more than 2 evacuation routes. In accordance with SB 379, also in the process of conducting the vulnerability assessment of physical resiliency policy. We are also conducting an evacuation routes of the evacuation routes and comply with the requirements under AB 737. Sorry, I forgot to ask you to it's ahead. One more, please. That we have created for existing conditions analysis based on the information available. One in the left is the FEMA floodplain map that depicts the areas that have potential for flooding. And the map on the right shows the shake potential in the city in the event of a seismic event. Range shows the very high or moderate fire hazard severity zone per Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. The map on the right lays out the potential evacuation routes that will be used for evacuation. We have several other maps that are being updated. Also in the process of making changes to the goals and policies section. This includes are no longer relevant and reorganizing. We are proposing to separate the existing goal 1 that currently combines the natural and the human-made hazards into 2 separate goals and adding subtopics for each hazard. We have added new subtopics, including climate resilience, fire, crime, and health emergency, and bolstered other topics with new policies and action. We are proposing to add new goals for education and awareness of the hazard. And lastly, we're establishing nexus with sustainability elements for policies and actions related to climate resiliency and community and public services element for police and fire related policies. We are also integrating the safety element with other planning documents such as emergency operation plans or Pinole Creek watershed vision plan and so on. Participating in the city council sessions in March and engagement at 2 community outreach workshops and also the online survey. In addition, SB 1241 requires that we consult with California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection for the approval of wildfire goals and policies, and we have established that contact. We have conducted a workshop call with Public Works, Fire, and Police to confirm evacuation routes and discuss evacuation scenarios for the evacuation route study. We also in the process of conducting focused interviews with Public Works, Fire, to confirm existing conditions and seek input on policy. With that, I will pass it on to Noel for environmental justice development.
We can go ahead to the next slide. And one more. All right, so the environmental justice element is really being prepared alongside of the safety element update. The environmental justice element is a new regulatory requirement for cities in California. Now a revision of 2 or more general plan elements triggers the need to create an environmental justice element. And as the city is updating the housing element and the safety element, your environmental justice element preparation is happening in parallel. Primary purpose of the environmental justice element is to identify impacted communities or areas that are disproportionately affected by environmental burden or in other environmental hazards. OPR recommends several data sources to comprehensively research and identify those areas of concern. And policies are then identified to reduce the compounded health risks, to promote civic engagement, and really to prioritize potential improvements in programs. It is important to note that some policies will be focused on specific communities and others will be applicable citywide. Next slide, please. The primary tool OPR recommends to identify disproportionately burdened communities is CalEnviroScreen. This is a data mapping tool developed and maintained by the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. This tool illustrates first a socioeconomic score, which is generated by data about sensitive populations, education levels, linguistic isolation, poverty, unemployment, and housing burden. And this is all shown on the left in pink. Right, we have our pollution burden score, which is generated by data from a broad range of pollutants, ozone, particulate matter, pesticides, lead, hazardous waste, and even impaired waters. The data is shown by a census tract, and then it is aggregated into a percentile score. And this is so tracts can be compared to each other. The greater the percentile score, the greater the pollution or the socioeconomic burden. So those would be the areas on this map that are shown in dark pink or dark blue. The lighter shaded areas would indicate lower scores, meaning reduced pollution or reduced socioeconomic burden. The pollution and the socioeconomic data is merged together to create a composite environmental CalEnviroScreen score, again, in a percentile for comparison purposes. The impacted community screening process begins by identifying those census tracts with scores of 75 or higher for OPR recommendations. And these census tracts would thus, using the percentile theory, the top 25% of all has a unique scenario where the impacted community shows up in a census tract that is only partially located within Pinole. It's the circle tract on the slide here. This is census tract 3922.02 with a composite score of 86.4. So we're a little bit above that. It is the city's only impacted community that meets or exceeds the OPR guidelines for a staff. Again, there will be policies that address the disproportionate pollution burden in this area, which we've gathered is likely associated with historical land uses and industry that have occurred largely outside the city. But alongside of that, there will be policies that address the entirety of the city. I'll go on to explain a little bit Our OPR regulations identify data resources covering additional topical areas as well outside of Cal and ViroScreen. So our team selected the most applicable data resources for Pinole that we have listed on the slide here, including some that were actually recommended to us during our last council presentation. Instead of that, we researched in the USDA Food Access Atlas. We did some research into Great Schools, Walk Score, and the Contra Costa County Elections Division. And all of this research yielded relevant information to environmental justice goals, policies, and actions. Each effort was conducted alongside of the safety element outreach through the survey and the previous community outreach. It's resulted in our policy framework organization. Our team organized the policy requirements recommended by the state to create 5 topical areas outlined here. We have our equity in medical care, equity in environment, equity in civic engagement, and equity in generation. This organizational structure meets and exceeds the need from OPR and really was developed so we could expand focus on those topical areas most important. We're initiating our policy preparation. Like Serby previously mentioned, we reviewed the safety element and selected relevant goals, actions, policies that would integrate well with our topical areas. Thus, the safety element focused specifically on safety and natural hazards, and our environmental justice policy will incorporate those health policies. After those health policies were integrated, our team developed additional policies based on community needs, best practice case studies, and also recommendations from the state. We have some examples of that. Each topical area will have at least one goal. There might be a couple that have more than one goal, but each one will most definitely have multiple policies and actions included. One policy in particular that we can call out now under equity. Here's an example of a health policy that we felt really lent itself well to environmental justice and was adapted as such. So generally, health policies that we pulled tended to be a little bit more general and applicable citywide. So our development, policy development by our team, those were more specific to certain locations, such as the impacted community we identified, or they're in response to specific data we uncovered during the existing conditions. So together, the policies will create a really comprehensive guidance tool for environmental justice moving forward.
I've got about 15 slides on the housing element update, so you can go to the next. Just really quickly, we covered it in some great detail in the prior workshop, so I'm going to have just a little bit about the housing element, and then we're going to get into slides about some of our sites and programs. So first of all, the housing element's purpose is to ensure the availability and fair distribution of housing throughout the city, and that we have to make sure that we're addressing all income levels in all stages of life. So small and large families, multifamily homes, single family homes, households with special needs. So seniors, veterans, disabilities, and maybe the unsheltered. And then we need to have a plan to accommodate our regional housing needs, otherwise known as RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And that's an allocation of specific goals, numeric dwelling units over the next 8 years. And those are broken down by household income levels, and we'll go into those a little bit. The slide shows the 6 major chapters that is the housing element. And they're kind of the 3 across the top and then the 3 across the bottom. It's more or less the order that we prepare them. So the first is a review of accomplishments, and that's really a look back at the prior housing element, particularly the recommended goals, policies, and actions, and evaluate how well it worked. You know, what was successful, what wasn't. And so we evaluate those programs, and then we make updates to. Second major chapter is a needs assessment, and that's a lot of socioeconomic demographic data to really look at the community in great detail. There's lots of tables and charts and figures that really slice the city and the county in a number of different ways to get a good understanding of what's happening in and around Pinole. Major chapter is housing resources. And this is one of the major components there is identifying the sites. And we'll talk about the sites a little bit more later. But the major objective is there to make sure that we have an inventory of available land to meet our future housing growth and demands. The resources also include discussion about financial resources and programmatic resources to help implement the plans and encourage the production of housing. The fourth major chapter is our constraints analysis. So we look at primarily the governmental and non-governmental regulations and potential constraints. A big one is the zoning and the regulations that contribute potentially some cost and time to housing production. So we look very closely at those and look at ways to streamline where possible. And then our last is our affirmatively furthering fair housing. And that's an assessment of fair housing conditions and a commitment to meaningful actions to improve fair housing. And again, that gets back to equal access and opportunity to housing. The last chapter is the implementation plans. We take all those 5 chapters and look at those original programs and then update our goals, policies, and recommended actions or programs to meet our housing needs. And that's for the next 8 years. Framework of what we're up to. And on the next slide, again, we just got quickly what our obligations are. So as I mentioned, there's a regional housing needs assessment that comes from the state that's divided to each of the regions. Each region gives their numbers and distributes these numbers down to each county and city. And so every municipality has an obligation to provide their fair share of the need over the next 8 years. The obligation is to provide, again, sufficient land that's appropriately zoned to meet that RHNA, Regional Housing Need Assessment. The city is not obligated to construct housing, but we have to do everything the city can to make sure that that actually occurs within the next 8 years. And that's kind of a new emphasis and requirement. And this cycle, this next 8-year cycle, is again, the city must demonstrate how these 500 units, and that's our RHNA for the city of Pinole, it's 500 units, will actually be constructed over the next 8 years. And I mentioned they're by income categories. We've got 5 main categories: extremely low, very low, low income, moderate, and above moderate. These are all based off the area median income. And for Contra Costa County, and based on this slide, it actually was just updated. That median area income was $125,000 in 2021. This slide, because the numbers just came out for 2022, and that area median income is now up to $142,000. That are tied to that, these income ranges. And then what we've got in the other subsequent columns to the right are what those households can afford at the top of those ranges in terms of rent and purchase price. And then the last column is the number of units that we need for those incomes. So we need 60 units for extremely low units, 60 units for very low, 69 units for low, 87 units for moderate, and 223 units that would be above moderate income or just market rate. See, that's our RHNA requirement there, and that's our goal for the next 8 years, and we need 500 units. So the next slide shows our sites inventory, and this is how we meet that. Again, we have an obligation to show how we're going to provide and make sure there's enough land to accommodate that growth. And what housing production, anything that's currently or recently approved within certain timeframes can count towards this next 8 years. And Pinole is very fortunate that we've had really good production over the last couple of years, and we're ahead of schedule. of the next 8-year period of regional housing needs has already been met with the current project. So this map shows in those various colors, it shows the approved projects in the light blue. Project that are under review, it's kind of a dark blue. Magenta are other sites that are proposed to fill in the gap and meet that full minimum density to accomplish that. So we're looking at generally 30 dwelling units per acre or more. So we've got plenty of good sites to meet those. And the main great, that's a major threshold. So we're very fortunate. We've got great production and our existing sites as zoned and in accordance with the current general plan. And programs. So this is kind of the bottom line, where we're going at the end of all this process. And so we're going to preview here what's in the housing plan and then go through some of the kind of goals, objectives, and policies and actions. So the housing plan is really comprised of 3 main pieces: the goals, which are broad objectives, desires, and outcomes. And then it's kind of a hierarchy. Then it goes down to more detail, which are the policies to implement those goals. And then let's talk about the general commitments and strategies and approaches to meeting those goals. And then the third level, and there's the most specific actions. These are measurable outcomes with timelines and metrics, identifies responsible parties, maybe funding. So we try to be very specific about how we meet each of those goal policies and finally with those actions. Outlining what the 5 major goals are from the current housing element. And that was monitoring housing needs, protect the existing character and heritage, provide adequate services and facilities. Number 4 was housing need. I think that's need. And was energy efficiency, conservation, sustainable development. So the next slide shows how we're proposing to organize it. And this is kind of based off of law and what the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, is really looking for. We've got the sites and that they're adequate and appropriately zoned and don't have things that would prevent them from being used to. Number 2, as we talked about earlier, like our analyses, we have a constraint removal. So we evaluate the regulations, governmental, non-governmental constraints, and come up with programs to help remove any identifiable or significant or unreasonable constraints. We look to maintain the affordable housing and the existing housing stock. Existing housing is tomorrow's affordable housing. New housing is always the most expensive. The older housing tends to be the most affordable. So we want to preserve and improve those going forward. So as we build our housing stock, we're maintaining the old stuff. First is housing assistance. So again, there's a variety of different tools and programs and techniques to help people housing needs. And that can be sometimes direct subsidies or assistance with funding new affordable housing projects, or it can be education information, a variety of different techniques. And we'll go through each of these. We'll have some examples. And then special housing needs. We need to make sure that we're covering all types of households and persons and their needs. So we talked about that at the beginning, about the different categories. And then lastly is affirmatively furthering fair housing. And that really seeks to try to repair and correct and rebalance some of the inequities that have occurred over time, so that people have adequate access to opportunity and good, safe, healthy housing. Okay. this slide just kind of talked about the process a little bit. We have currently 23 housing programs or detailed actions. And through that review process, we typically do three things with them. We'll take out ones that are completed. We'll modify or update those programs that were retained, make sure they meet our current needs and requirements. And then we have new programs, and sometimes these are programs to meet state requirements. We've had a whole slew of new state housing law that we need to comply with. So there's typically programs to do that. And then again, if there's any new particularly needs or challenges, we may have new programs for that. Slides is about 6. And that goes through each of those categories we went through before. So this is just to provide a little bit more detail. The first one is housing production. So what do we do for that? We make sure, you see the bullets here, we make sure that we zone for adequate sites, as I mentioned. Our existing zoning is adequate, but we need to make sure we've got enough sites. So that map I showed earlier, make sure that we cover our arena, our 500 units, well, I'll say 20% buffer that we identified. So we've got a little bit of wiggle room there in case some of those sites don't develop as intended. Density zones, where we have really few sites, we don't want to lose those to an underdeveloped site. So that's where larger developments are required to provide a certain percentage of units that would be below market rate into a housing fund in lieu of actually building them. Accessory dwelling units are a great tool to meet your needs. They tend to be naturally affordable. They don't need subsidy. In communities, typically in a backyard or a garage or above a garage or within a unit, home, and their income needs naturally. And collaborate with and assist housing developers, particularly affordable housing developers. And again, a lot of affordable housing are producing. And as I mentioned, constraint removal, and typically we're looking at process is clear and direct, that we have objective development standards, and it is easy to understand. It's very clear. It's kind of black and white as opposed to subjective, where it's subject to somebody's interpretation. So we try to remove those subjective standards and put in objective standards. Makes it easier for everybody to comply with what the city's goals are. And then dwelling units. And a lot of cities have had really good success with promoting ADUs, and one way to do that. So they've already been, construction drawings approved by the city, so you can save a lot of time and money for homeowners who want to build an accessory dwelling unit. It doesn't remove all the costs, but save them quite a bit. So that's anybody who wants to build an accessory dwelling unit, and that helps meet. The third category is housing preservation programs. I think I kind of mentioned this. We might have rehabilitation loans, assistance with housing maintenance, rate housing that typically are under covenants for a certain period of time. And as they start to mature, so we encourage, we call those at risk, and we encourage them to re-up and remain affordable. Housing assistance programs, there's a number of different ones. One of the most popular is housing choice vouchers. This is something that the city doesn't directly implement, but it's operated through the county. And what that does is allow people to basically have a voucher, which is equivalent to cash. And find your own housing. You're not obligated to stay in any housing. You can go for market rate housing, provided you can afford that with your income and a voucher. And then often we do and mediation services to provide to make sure tenants and landlords each understand their rights and responsibilities, particularly as there's new changes to housing law, and make sure that people understand special housing programs. So these are just some examples. Several of these you see that they're required in parentheses. These are as a result of recent changes to state housing law. But one example is funding the senior center, and that would help seniors. There are low barrier navigation centers. That's for people who are under great housing stress or duress, maybe don't have housing, they're homeless. And the idea is you come into it, you need. So why do you need housing? They help you find immediate housing and help you get some services. There's transitional and supportive housing. And again, bullets here are new requirements or modified requirements by the state in recent state laws in the last couple of years. Care facilities, emergency shelters, and make sure that we have a reasonable accommodation process. Affirmatively furthering fair housing obligations. And some of the programs that we do are, again, education, making sure people understand their rights and responsibilities, both as a tenant and a landlord. So if you feel that you're a tenant, you're being discriminated against, and maybe as you can't, or even be shown appropriate homes, that's discrimination. And that's a violation of our laws. And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. If that doesn't happen, you should report it. And to the city, but there's also city contracts with a fair housing service provider that specializes in these and helps again and mediate they solve them before they become bigger problem. Housing choice vouchers. There's a recent case law. It used to be that landlords could just outright deny acceptance of vouchers, and you even see that. You know, I got a unit for rent, but I don't accept Section 8 or housing vouchers. They can't do that anymore. Make sure that all landlords understand that because the law has changed. Make sure that tenants understand that if they've got a voucher, they understand that they can take that everywhere. The actual improvements over the years, there's many communities, there's older portions of the city and newer portions of the city, and it creates some inequities. The newer portions tend to get all the newest, latest, greatest, precious parks and roads and sidewalks and street trees and libraries and you know, maybe don't have those same benefits or they're worn out. And so we're looking for place-based improvements. Make sure those older areas or maybe areas that don't have those same facilities. Rams, and I think we can wrap up and answer your questions and comments.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Then I will, before I turn it back to the council, I believe there's a member of the public who wants to speak. I respect, I will make you speak now, so you don't have to wait another hour. And then I will bring it back to the council and the planning commission. And I would invite every commissioner and city council member to please limit yourself to 2 questions, ask 1 question at a time. And the answer will be provided to you within 30 seconds to 1 minute. And then after that, you would have 2 minutes to provide any comments if you wish to. Thank you. Ms. Long, good evening, ma'am. How are you?
Good evening, my name's Debbie Long. I live in Pinole, but many people don't know that, particularly those that know our postcards. 94803 is also a Pinole zip code, and there are probably at least 50 of us, and we are always forgotten when this information is sent out.
I specifically want to address SB 99 and how it affects the city, particularly where I'm at. I live off of Rancho Road. Rancho Road actually dead ends where Galbraith is. And both of our communities only have one access in and one access out. And we're also the highest fire danger within the entire city. And so I hope that there is a very complete, comprehensive report coming from our fire department as well as Contra Costa County, because I am also surrounded by El Sobrante. We're the donut hole within the donut is how I kind of describe ourselves. So I'm hoping that everyone will take a particular hard look at the health and safety arena. It's something that we probably are behind on a little bit, given all the wildfires that have been continuous through 2010 and beyond. So it is required, has been required, as was pointed out, since 2020 for any housing update. And I hope that that is one area that you will follow and track completely. It is to bring in sync with newer developments that have already had that requirement. And Galbraith has the wide road that was always expected for emergency. And at the end of Rancho, it was open for emergency access. But over the years, the county and the city have allowed trees to grow, fences to grow. They've done a development. I think they split a lot or something. So it's an area that I really am asking the Planning Commission to take a look at when this comes through. It's kind of a common sense approach. The other thing I'd like to address very quickly is that when considering development, please remember that the maximum requirement in terms of size, density, and parking is not an entitlement. So when a development comes through, if you look at what the minimum and the maximum and work within that structure, as opposed to just giving the maximum and looking at how you can keep within the spirit of the law, but also keep our community so we're not all bunched up in one place with a lot of traffic issues. And if we don't have necessarily walkability and the other health and safety issues that go along with this as well. I enjoyed the presentation and I hope that this will be posted on the Pinole site so that we can all have access to review it as well. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Ms. Song. Yes, we will post it on the website and it will be as part of the agenda.
It is posted on the website.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Madam City Clerk.
Quick question. Is the updated PowerPoint there with all the information on it?
Yes.
Thank you. I will then turn it back to, I would like us to note the comments provided to us by former city council member, Ms. Fong, so that we get to make sure they want that address to make sure that we actually send those letters. We would try to this community who leave, like she said, Donald Hall instead of the Donald Hall. So we don't want to forget about them. Let me turn it back to the city council first, and I will first ask Madam Council Member Martinez Ruben. Good evening, ma'am. Can you please ask one question at a time? And then I will give you 2 minutes to provide any comments if you wish to.
Sure, thank you. I was curious about what inequities have been found that have occurred over time with regard to housing. Given that, if I heard correctly, there is primarily one census tract in Pinole, partially in Pinole, partially, I suppose, it's San Pablo or Richmond. That is most brilliant for the Office of Planning and Research. That's my question. Discover that are applicable either to that particular a little more broadly in Pinole.
The inequities were less related to housing. I think I heard you mention really related to pollution burden that we found with a little bit of socioeconomic showing some higher poverty rates and some higher linguistic isolation and some higher challenges. But getting back to the pollution component, we found that some heavy industry associated in that area is likely contributing to the talent screen being so high. And we acknowledge that, you know, those pollution barriers don't really, or the pollution levels don't necessarily respect the census tract boundaries. So we're seeing them adjacent to the city, and we're trying to evaluate how that could carry over, especially in terms of air quality. That obviously doesn't respect the boundaries of a census tract. But in our research, we haven't necessarily found significant inequities to let Dan or Emily maybe speak to that specific subset if they found anything.
Yeah, I think you hit it right. Well, that area might have some slightly lower or higher rates of poverty or lower incomes than some of the other areas of the city. And again, some different language and barriers or demographics, but on that map was, like I said, the police. Any areas of communities that are areas of real inequity, you know, we'd love to hear that and please comment and let us know. So if there is something there.
Thank you.
Is there a
Please
second
go ahead
one?
and ask.
Thank you. Do I have a second question?
Please go ahead.
I have a second question. And that is the differentiation between the older parts of town and new. Criteria that we're using to walk through parts of town that are not in the old town. Very dark atmospheres in the night, and that contributes to a sense of lack of safety. And that's just one example, but it's not necessarily about what criteria you're using to delineate an older part.
It's not a you know, particular analysis that we're doing. It's not a hard criteria if you're older than a certain, you know, age or building structure age or anything like that. It's just we typically see that in most cities as they grow, particularly in the last few decades, we see a lot of that growth. More recent development proposals where, again, prior to 2 or 3 years ago, I think that your rates of production, your housing production was relatively low and almost static. But again, hard and fast criteria. So we're really focused on what you mentioned, or any areas that might be lacking any particular facilities or amenities. Lighting or sidewalks or access to parks and recreation. But some communities don't have access to healthy food. But these are the kind of things that we're looking for. It doesn't really matter whether they're old or new. We'll be looking to everybody has good, safe, healthy community.
And I'll reserve my comments on your comments for later, I suppose.
No,
Thank
please
you.
go ahead, Councilmember Martinez Ruben. You have floor to make your 2 minutes for comment at this moment, please. Councilmember Martinez Ruben, please go ahead. You can make your comments at this moment if you wish. Yes, I think it's still, Councilmember Martinez Ruben, can you hear us? Go ahead,
Hi,
please
this
make
is
your
Mayor
comments.
Gibson,
Can you
Judge
please?
Murphy, I'm not sure we hear the count.
Okay, you cannot hear us.
We're
Okay,
just gonna
let
take
me,
a pause and perhaps let
Okay,
the-
thanks
the
for letting me know.
vision.
Okay.
Councilmember Martinez Ruben, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, must have lost, Councilmember Martinez Rubens, I'm coming back for in a few minutes. I will move on to the
Mayor,
next.
what's happening is when you, through your computer, we can hear you, but we can't hear the live stream from the council chambers.
Yeah, thank you. What I will do, I will.
Sure. I guess I'll comment on Dan's comment. Matter, the matter of spotting, necessarily aligned with the age of the identify those areas, and we an email, would that suffice?
That'd be great.
Very good. Also, another comment on your comment is that, of course, there are certain degrees of what distance to healthy food, for example. You may believe that we don't have food deserts in Pinole. In fact, I think we do otherwise. So is there a standard by which you, again, will is or isn't in that example a food desert, or again in a network? It's going to, what is likely to happen, as we hear in public comment, are different appreciation perceptions of what is. So we would like to address what we can. But as we all know, given resources, we can only do. It's always going to be helpful for us to have a sense of how the standard of living, and if eligible for the kind of resources that could be available through a Department of Housing or otherwise, particularly to we learned are not in place for such areas as special housing needs programs.
Access to healthy food. It could be hard and fast rules. It's very qualitative and somewhat subjective evaluation. So we really look for input, evaluate that in the context of all the other considerations. So we're really looking for input. These come through the surveys, through stakeholder input, through these public workshops, comments to the website. And so we got a lot of different comments about all sorts of different things. And I think streetlights actually was one that did come up earlier. And I think there was some other about some intersections like that. So we try to look at all of those, and again, with limited resources, pick the ones that can be done. Very popular where maybe it's consensus. So if we have one comment, it's something to look at. We don't want to dismiss any one person. But if we have 100 people saying, hey, we've got a real problem, whatever that problem is, then we're going to try to probably focus on those that get more. So unfortunately, I can't say, well, if you're exactly 3 miles from the nearest market with produce, that's something we can look at. But typically, we're looking for some tell us first that there's a problem, and then evaluate further.
If I may jump in there quickly too, specifically on the food access, that was folded into the existing conditions report in environmental justice. And our findings were that we didn't find any significant deserts. This is using the USDA resources, and we understand that access to supermarkets can be subjective. The resources that USDA, they combine low income groups that are further than a mile in urban areas from a supermarket. None of those zones are showing up in the city. We have a few But they're still shown in that like middle area, not desert. But correct me again if I'm wrong, we haven't heard significant comments on that in our outreach, but it is documented in environmental justice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I actually heard. Evaluate these things will be different. I apologize. I have a housing hat on.
That's why we're all here as a team to answer these questions comprehensively.
Thank you.
So thanks, Dan.
That's right.
I don't think they can
And
hear me.
Both of your comments actually.
That's
confirm
why.
Observations, for those of us who've been in it.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. So I'm glad to find that. And my query has to do all with helping regard for input. On the other hand, it has to be evaluated relative to other interests or concerns that can be justified as usual in with public funded programs. But I'm concerned about the requirements for special housing programs and as requirements of where we or whether we can anticipate having to have some discussions on city council and board commission or however we put our heads together to address those. I mean, that's a question for our director.
I would at this moment, take a 5 minute break. We have a technical issue here in the city hall. I will, it's 7:15. We'll be back at 7:20. Thank you. So now if I speak, can you hear us? I just need somebody to speak back. Can you hear?
I can hear you.
I cannot hear you, Dave.
I can hear you.
I hear you.
We can hear you, we just don't know if they can hear you.
Yeah, keep talking.
Keep talking, okay.
So I think the problem was actually the Zoom participants hearing us just using the microphones and not the computer microphones.
Correct.
Yes.
We'll keep talking, so can we identify where the problem is?
I guess the question I have is, do we know whether broadcast is also having the issue with audio going out or whether it's just the Zoom level problem?
It's probably at the Zoom level because they're listening. Oh, actually,
No, it's the
Probably broadcast.
it's the broadcast. Well, if it's broadcast, that means they can't do it up, which means.
Well, at one point, like when we started it.
Right, I think something just must have happened.
A fuse